some things, there is a space in some things, there is concession for necessity and so on. This is the balance. When a person goes to an extreme in maqasid, meaning applying them outside their context, and this is very common in blog posts and so on, you become hyper-liberal. Why? Because the maqsad of salah is to connect with Allah, and this is an abusive word, just so you know, right? And I don't connect with Allah well at 5 a.m. in the morning because, you know, I sleep late, I'm a night owl, I connect much better, so I'm on the Fajr at 8:30 a.m. plan, right? That's a kind of convoluted, messed up, maqsad-based argument, right? It's not a legitimate argument, but that one is funny and crazy. But now in terms of social norms, in terms of legislation, particularly where it may bring in difficulty, you'll see a lot of that in our times. And that is a misapplication and an abuse of maqasid. Just as if you go to the other side and apply fiqh in the limited contextual situation, that you take a ruling indicated for one person and make it general, then you become hyper-conservative, hyper-liberal, because you're looking through a microscope for a situation that may be appropriate for one context, not appropriate for another. So I just want you to be very aware, because these are, in popular literature and blogs, these are very, very commonly misapplied and abused in both senses. Over-restrictiveness, and throughout our tradition, a fatwa has always been understood to be a ruling of an individual for a specific person and context. If you see a fatwa on Google News, that's not what it is. You see what I'm saying? If a fatwa makes it to Google News, underneath that, somebody has taken that ruling and made it, let's make fun of Muslims, this for everybody. That's outside of our tradition. Similarly for the Muslims, so I want you to just be aware of that. There's another point. Another point on Hadith number 9. Do we extract from this Hadith that it's wrong to ask? No. What do you think? Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts on this issue, on questioning? You mentioned excessive questioning is wrong, the evidence from Surah An-Nur. Anything else on question?
Questioning to learn is okay, as long as you're asking questions to understand and be able to learn from the wisdom that may not be obvious to you, should be okay. But questioning just for the sake of questioning is something which is not recommended.
How many people, show of hands, think that questioning is encouraged and allowed in Islam? Raise your hand. How many people think questioning is discouraged and prohibited? How many people didn't raise their hand? In terms of the rulings of Usul al-Fiqh, obligatory, allowed, permissible, disliked, or haram. Which ruling applies to asking questions in Islam?
It's the obligatory, right? Because if you don't understand how
all 5 apply. And I want you to notice this. I hadn't intended to show you this, but I think this is beneficial, so I want to take a moment to just pull it up for you, inshallah. Okay, I hadn't intended to show you this, but I think it's important to talk about. Okay, when we look at a question, we can broadly look at questions in 2 big categories. Okay, broadly, some questions are used to clarify or learn what is necessary and beneficial. Remember this, that a consistent concept around al-ilm is ilman, Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'a, beneficial knowledge. So Al-Quran does not primarily distinguish ilm in terms of sacred or secular, or sacred and worldly, right? These are useful classifications. But generally the pursuit of beneficial and necessary knowledge is praiseworthy. That's why there are many exemplary companions and pious predecessors. They are not specialists in Islamic knowledge per se, or fuqaha, and yet are exceptional Muslims. The majority of the companions, actually the vast overwhelming majority, fall into this category. Most of them are not from fuqaha as-sahaba, but they are exceptional Muslims. Okay? And so in general, not just Islamic knowledge or Shari'i knowledge, but medicine cures, this, people's needs, transactions, business, etc., etc. All of this could be considered beneficial knowledge and an act of worship. Another type is that which is seeking excessive hardship, and I'm sorry for the word, intransigence. I have no idea how to translate this to a better English word. The first one is takalluf, but this Arabic word intransigence that's most properly translated into English intransigence is that which is asked with the purpose of kind of quashing the opponent, or being seen as smart, or being seen as overwhelming, right? It talks to the intent of the question, right? Regardless of the question even itself. And Islamically, questions are tied to their intention. What is the major story about questioning in Al-Quran al-Karim? What is one of the most focused stories about the issue of balance and intent in questions? The story of Al-Baqarah. Okay, understand this clearly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala named the longest surah after this incident in the story. Bani Israel had killed, there had been a man that was killed, and they did not know who the murderer was. So they came to Prophet Musa alayhi salam, and they asked for help. This is not a small deal, right? You're speaking to a prophet of Allah, asking for assistance in this, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, and Prophet Musa alayhi salam indicated, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقَرَةً, that Allah commands you to slaughter a cow. What did they respond? قَالُوا أَتَتَّخِذُونَ هُزُوًا, are you kidding with us? Like, this is how you translate the emotion, right? Are you joking, man? Like, that's how we would say it in our language, right? This is extraordinarily disrespectful on so many levels, right? This is a direct commandment from Allah. You're speaking to a prophet of Allah. A righteous person would not dare joke about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what about a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This concept, much less that it came across the tongue, is on the path that would take a person to kufr. This is a big deal, right? And then what happens? And then what happens as the story goes, right? Oh, Musa, call upon your Lord to make the cows, to make this matter clear to us, right? Then what happens? The ulama comment, Shatibi and others comment on this story, that Bani Israel constricted upon themselves, so Allah caused them to be constricted. What did Allah say? What did Allah reveal? Slaughter a cow. Which cow? Any cow. Understand? But as they asked more, they made things more and more difficult upon themselves. Allah did not make this difficulty, they brought it upon themselves, right? And I want to really focus, because the reason I want to spend some time on this issue is because almost, let me revise that, much of what is said about questioning, even in our Islamic spaces, even in our conferences, is really does not point out this distinction. We are coming from a cultural context where everybody's saying, don't ask, just believe. Why are you asking, right? And this has caused a lot of people a lot of hardship. But a reaction to an extreme is to come back to the balance, not to go to the opposite extreme, right? So many people are just saying, ask away, it doesn't matter. No. That's hard to substantiate. Asking is an amana. If you're not going to put in the work and the effort to understand, then you really are better off not asking, right? I look at this with the analogy of swimming. Is swimming evil? No. Is taking someone that doesn't know how to swim and throwing them into the ocean evil? Yeah, very evil, right? So if you are not willing to swim and sweat and exert and work to swim the oceans of asking a question, then stay out of the pool. You understand? There's no shame in saying that. If a person just says, no, I want to outsource this to somebody else, okay, then just hold your tongue, right? Pick somebody you trust, trustworthy scholar, follow them. Because questioning is an amanah. And this story is very powerful in that they kept asking, right? And asking more, and asking more. Can you imagine after the cow had been described to the point that it's a golden or yellow colored cow with this specific preparation? What do they say? قَالُوا ادْعُ لَنَا رَبَّكَ يُبَيِّن لَنَا مَا هِيَ إِنَّ الْبَقَرَ تَشَابَهَ عَلَيْنَا. Has anybody ever seen a yellow cow in their whole life? To be confused about that the cows all look the same, this really shows the intent, the lacking intent of the question. By the time it's described more and more, that it's a cow that has not been prepared for irrigation, right? Nor for working the fields. Now it's very, very specific. And Allah describes it after they found it and they paid a fortune for it. فَذَبَحُوهَا وَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. They slaughtered it after all this, they almost weren't going to. Why? Because the intent of questioning was wrong. And so all of these rulings come to questions in Islam. Some questions are necessary and wajib to ask. Those things that we need to know. Some people tell you, oh, I got this amazing job offer. I just graduated from such and such university. I don't know and I didn't ask. No, Habibi, you have to ask. Wajib to ask. You cannot enter into that line of work and say, I didn't ask, therefore I don't know. No, in this case, you have to ask before you open the business, before you enter the line of work, right? Before you get married, you have to understand what rights and responsibilities are, right? Before you take the responsibility of leadership, you have to understand what's going on. All of these are examples of what is known, must be known by necessity, right? And obviously how to make wudu, how to pray, those are the common textbook type answers. And then keep going, right? Some things, beneficial knowledge, good to ask. Whether, the wolf pack won, last night or not, or whenever they played, which is permissible, it's not rewarded or punished, right? And then you get to disliked questioning and haram and prohibited questioning. Okay, so all of these rulings come in terms of questions.
So what kind of question would be prohibited?
The categories of prohibited question, great question. Jazakallah khairan. So types of prohibited or makruh, disliked questioning. One type is useless questions, questions that do not have a benefit in deen or in life, right? Remember, I'm not saying all these are haram, some of these are makruh, but an example of this in classical times is in Surah Al-Baqarah. There's narrated actually about this verse that the Prophet ﷺ was asked about al-ahilla, right? The moons. Why is the crescent moon like this, and then it becomes a full moon, and then it comes back to being like a sliver? You look at the verse, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ قُلْ هِيَ مَوَاقِيتُ لِلنَّاسِ وَالْحَجِّ. Say it is, helps you keep time for the months and Hajj. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala switches topics to that which has benefit to people, right? And speaks about the manners and approach of houses, right? And so this is one. Another is extending beyond the beneficial, right? And that is, powerfully represented in the story of Al-Baqarah, right? That we have what is sufficient and what is beneficial, and it is extended beyond that. I'm sorry, category one, by the way, a common example of this is a lot of celebrity or entertainment news. Right? A lot of celebrity or entertainment news. I'm going to talk about this more in Hadith number 10. Hadith, prohibited category number 3, these are, by the way, from Imam al-Shatibi, are things that are before its time. This is specific to, mostly specific to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَسْأَلُوا عَنْ أَشْيَاءٍ إِن تُبْدَ لَكُمْ تَسُؤْكُمْ وَإِن تَسْأَلُوا عَنْهَا حِينَ يُنَزَّلُ الْقُرْآنُ تُبْدَ لَكُمْ عَفَا اللَّهُ عَنْهَا. The companions were prohibited from asking about things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had not revealed, and if they asked, it may have been the cause of revelation to bring this hardship. Obviously now, this is not applicable in that regard, right? But the companions had such deep trust of the Prophet ﷺ, they knew that the order and stage of things was, purposeful and divinely guided. But the spirit of this lives on, in that, for example, our convert brothers and sisters, day 2 of accepting Islam, and the poor brother or the poor sister is bombarded by people talking about how to dress and how to do this and fast and pray and this and that, and they haven't learned the Fatiha. This is a sense of moving things outside of their order or their time. And so people should be addressed according to their capacity and to their level and to their stage. A fourth type is like trap or embarrassing questions. An example of this is that a scholar was narrating a general hadith for people, not a classroom like this. And one of the people said, "Oh Sheikh, what's the isnad for this hadith?" So the Sheikh said, "An Muhammad ibn such and such, an Ahmad, an fulan, on this, on that the Prophet ﷺ said." And he narrated the hadith. Remember, this is a general kind of musalla reminder that's just benefiting the people. These are not students of knowledge. So the man sat back very, very happy and satisfied. So the Sheikh told him, "Muhammad is my barber. Ahmad is my butcher. This person is my neighbor. That person is that." Teaching what? This man did not have the tools to understand the answer to this question. This question is just meant to flex smart muscles or to embarrass the teacher. There's no benefit behind the answer to this question because the person doesn't have the tools to it. And so in general, these are also prohibited. Sadly, you see a lot of these in Muslim conferences, right? And young students kind of flexing ilm muscles, right? Questions that are supra-rational, that are beyond the scope of human understanding, right? These are, for example, excessive questioning about al-ghaib or the rewards of al-ghaib, or asking, why 7 circuits around the Kaaba instead of 6 or 8. These things are legislated by Allah to test our obedience. There are other wisdoms, but they are beyond the ability of the human mind. Number 6, prodding intrusive, like asking somebody about their private affairs or salaries or things that there's no benefit to. Opposing the clear Quran and Sunnah by rationale or argumentation. This is common in our time to the so-called modernists that accept Quran and Sunnah on their face, but then offer rational arguments why they don't apply in our time and we should apply some intellectual structure. Okay. Questions about the mutashabihat, like Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Lam Mim, which certainly there's wonderful theories about, but no one knows the true and full meaning of this but Allah. Number 9 is seeking criticism, discord among those religious figures that are accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not just some religious leader or some political leader, but it's people that Allah has indicated their acceptance, right? And a famous story of this is that Umar ibn Aziz was asked about the fighting among the people of Siffin, which obviously had very tragic time of fitna with companions and so on. And he responded that this was bloodshed that Allah protected my hands from, and so I don't wish that I would soil my tongue with it, right? And so being very cautious. Again, this is coming from adab with the Quran al-Kareem. And number 10 I spoke to you about, right? Desire to prevail or show off. Discussion and argumentation should be about the knowledge, not about the ego or the self. Any more questions about hadith number 9 before we move forward? We'll do a reading of Hadith number 9 and 10. عن أبي هريرة عبد الرحمن بن صخر رضي الله عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم كثرة مسائلهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم رواه البخاري ومسلم. الحديث العاشر عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله تعالى طيب لا يقبل إلا طيبا وإن الله أمر المؤمنين بما أمر به المرسلين فقال تعالى يا أيها الرسل كلوا من الطيبات واعملوا صالحا وقال تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم ثم ذكر الرجل يطيل السفر أشعث أغبر يمد يديه إلى السماء يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب ومطعمه حرام ومشربه حرام وملبسه حرام وغذي بالحرام فأنى يستجاب له. This hadith is about restricting oneself to the permissible, an extraordinarily, extremely important hadith, especially for those of you at the life stage where you are studying or taking a first job or moving to a new status of employment. The hadith starts by describing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the word tayyib, right? And tayyib means that which is pure. And Ibn Rajab describes it as being a tayyib tahir, right? Which is another word for goodness and purity. Part of our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that He is pure and perfect. He is free from every blemish and shortcoming and described by every measure of perfection. And so, among the consequences of this belief is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not get tired, does not get hungry, does not err, does not, far be it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be unjust, right? To use power unjustly or inappropriately, the way that human beings do with their limited authority. But also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wholly and entirely unlike His creation, in that even outside of like character faults that human beings may have, being greedy or being oppressive or committing injustice, still an honest, upright human being is still described by things that are specific to creation, in just that their incompleteness and imperfection. Every human being will sweat on a hot day, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above and beyond these types of limitations. There's no shame or sin in this limitation, but it is part of the difference between the Creator and the created, the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala and His creation, right? The human beings need to rid oneself from filth, to use the restroom, our bodily functions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above and free and beyond any of these imperfections or limitations as well. As He is beyond forgetfulness or tiredness. There is an athar, this athar is not at the highest level of authenticity, but the meaning is beneficial, is supported by more authentic texts, that it was narrated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded Musa alayhi salam to hold up a stick with two weights at either end, and to continue holding it. And so Musa alayhi salam carried this load upon his back and his shoulder, alayhi salam, and kept carrying it until there's a difference in Arabic between sleep and nawm, and then nu'as, which is like when you doze off, right? And so when he started to doze off and a little sleepishness took him, then the load started to fall, right? And that in this athar that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the likeness that if a Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, were any nu'as were to overtake him and he is above and beyond that, then this is what would happen to the heavens and the earth. Right? So a simple, easy example for us, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, Allah's beyond all description, to understand the greatness and the perfection and the completeness of Allah Azza wa Jalla. It's very important because in our times, and especially in some of the dominant narratives of people of religion around us, it is very common to hear descriptions of God that are not in this manner. So I want to emphasize this in simple kind of English language, to emphasize part of our Islamic belief and iman, that some other religious texts describe, God as needing rest or getting tired or forgetting, and these, in our belief of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are unbefitting and unbecoming of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so we should understand this from this text and from other of course, ayat and ahadith. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also, this hadith, talks about the importance of purity in our actions and in our money and in our food and in our words. Okay? Obviously, gaining money and eating food is from actions, right? But broadly, our actions, including things like money and food, and our words should also be pure for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept them. And in the hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, whomever gives in charity what is equivalent to a date that is from his pure earnings, right? Min kasbin tayyib, wa la yaqbalu Allahu illa tayyib. And Allah does not accept except that which is pure, that which is tayyib and pure and wholesome and good. And the hadith continues. Okay? A very powerful Quranic story about this, which includes in it قوله تعالى إنما يتقبل الله من المتقين. Can anyone pull out that Allah accepts from the pious, the people of taqwa? Can anyone pull out or guess what this story is?
Adam's son.
The story is the story of the sons of Adam, right? Qabil and Habil, as comes in Surah Al-Ma'idah. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded them to sacrifice, it is narrated from outside the Quran, supporting narrations, that Habil picked a very fine and proper and kind of, prized fat animal, that he would give to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that which is pure and wholesome and desirable and good. And then Qabil kind of picked kind of a lousy, undesirable bit of vegetation, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted from one and did not accept from the other. So the son of Adam moved to kill his brother. And Habil clarified, إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. That it's not favoritism or random, that Allah accepts that which is from the pious. And part of this piety and purity is that what we give Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is given in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what is, our efforts and our words that we want Allah to accept from us are pure and good and wholesome. And my brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Ghani. He has no need of accepting what is not pure. There's no need of accepting anything in the first place. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-tayyib and pure. And so this hadith tells us that He does not accept it, that He accept that which is pure. The ulama have had some difference around what it means here to have a deed accepted. Can anyone suggest what could be the point of difference here about al-qabul, about acceptance?
That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala listens to even people that don't believe in Him, or in the respect that they don't accept Him, the disbelievers. So,
No, and so there are texts that indicate that even a dua of a disbeliever could be accepted or that their good deeds benefit them. And so this is a source of difference among the ulama, but the specific meaning here. But one of the strong opinions is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not reward the deed that is not pure. So for example, there is a hadith that indicates that a person that becomes, that consumes alcohol, that Allah does not accept their salah for 40 days. This doesn't mean that that person doesn't have to pray. And if they don't pray, then not only they don't get reward, but they may be eligible for punishment. But that, as part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being displeased with this act, that He may not reward them for those prayers for 40 days, right? Many ulama understand the hadith in this manner, okay? And so, the difference aside, right, on the specifics, it clearly makes a very big concern for us that what we eat, what we do is pure so it can be worthy of acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The believer is not going to be comfortable to be treading the line, well, does this mean that I'm not going to get reward or that I'm going to get punishment, right? Or that Allah's going to give me a little reward but not be proud of me. We want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be pleased and happy with our deeds. And clearly to do that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects and mandates that these deeds be pure and tayyib. In this,
yeah, I guess when we talk about Allah doesn't accept the non-pure or not pure things, it doesn't mean that God Himself did not accept it. It just means that God did not put it in the scale of His deed, of good deed. I think that's what it means to the extent. Let's say someone who give, to the masjid donation, all from haram. That is, he gave a donation, but he's not going to be put into his scale of righteousness.
Right.
That's what I mean. But it's not for God Himself, because He's not accepting it to put it in His scale to add it to His good deed.
No, this was the acceptance. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no need of accepting in any way that He has no need of anything for Himself subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has heavens and earth. But the acceptance here is the acceptance of the deed, the rewardability of the deed. And the example you gave is very helpful about donating, for example, from haram money, right? That this person may not get the reward, and this is what is meant by the acceptance here. In the completion of the, yes?
Maybe a language issue. Is this hadith talking about, at the end, the acceptance of Allah or acceptance of the deed?
The example is given with the dua at the end. It will come to in just a moment, inshallah. And please remind me if it doesn't become clear. The middle part of the hadith, I want to give you a story. Is there a question? Or? I want to give you a story that I think will help bring the meaning closer. Outside of this area, I was, attending a particular event with a group from different faith traditions, an educational event, and it was hosted by there was a specific faith group there whom their religious leaders were not permitted to covet or desire any portion of dunya. Meaning, they could not buy or want clothes. They could only clothe themselves with what they had been given, right? Somebody just handed them clothes. They could not pursue food. Somebody had to hand them food. If they get it, they eat. If they don't eat. Their righteousness for their religious leaders was a total detachment and rejection of dunya. You understand? This particular educational event coincided with kind of a special date on their calendar, which was the end of a period of fasting. So there was this big table spread, right? Enormous table spread with every type of luxurious food imaginable on the side counter, like where kitchen preparation would be, and this empty table in the middle. And so I was like, wow, these people are going to take care of us today, right? This is more than an educational event. But actually, we just stood on the side, purely observing. Food was not for us. And the adherents of this particular faith, so all of the others that are not religious leaders, they're dressed normally and they got their kids and they live life. It's just these religious leaders that have this total detachment from dunya. These religious leaders walk in and they're seated at the table. Then all of the congregants, right? This food on the side had been the best and most choice and most desirable food from what they had prepared that week. So they took it from the counter and they put it on the food, on the table. You with me? Meat and like starches and this and salads. I mean, a feast, but a feast that you could only watch, right? So they ate from this until when they were done, they removed it. And then guess what happened? They brought dessert. Remember, I told you at the beginning, they cannot covet food, and they must only eat for sustenance, not for pleasure. And then the dessert was brought, every cake and every, obviously nobody competes with kind of Muslim culture desserts in my point of view, right? But, good desserts from all over the world. They ate it, and then it was removed. And actually, we starved, right? I say this with due respect, but kind of dialogue and criticism, right? In my mind, what's settled? Does anyone eat cake for sustenance? Right? If you don't eat cake, are you going to die? You see what I'm saying? Or we may also respectfully examine and analyze those people who closeness to God is associated with, for example, not marrying, not having children, right? That this brings you closer to Him. Do you understand now why I'm sharing these verses in light of just this story describing the opposite, if you will? Many people see that religiosity or closeness to God is by abandoning dunya. And this can be pushed to a level that we may criticize as hypocritical, right? As not human, right? And the famous example of the three people that asked Aisha radiallahu anha about the worship of the Prophet ﷺ, and it's as if they found it to be little. But then they reviewed themselves, this is the Prophet ﷺ, and who are we? And so one of them committed to, right? Fasting forever, the other praying all night, and the other not marrying from women. The Prophet ﷺ emphasized that this was not from his sunnah. Whoever abandons his sunnah, then he is not from him. So religiosity and closeness to Allah is this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted and in fact commanded, right? And allowed the eating of good things and pure things, right? And halal things, right? And He commanded the believers with what He commanded the prophets with. And this is also an argument against those disbelievers that said, what are these prophets? They walk among the markets and they eat like we do. Well, they are prophets from the people, right? Otherwise we would say, how could we follow them? They're angels or there's something else, right? And so this hadith, I don't want that power to be lost on any of us. And I think it is helpful to articulate how some among Muslims and some among other faith traditions have seen that closeness to Allah is the opposite. No, for us, very righteous and very exemplary people marry and have children, and the chief among them are the prophets, right? Righteous and good people. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba went through such immense hardship and such hunger, but they did not seek it. And sometimes, on occasion, they had the ease of eating to their satisfaction and their fill, right? They didn't reject it, oh no, we're people of hunger. No, but sometimes when it was hungry, they had to be patient. And when they had plenty, they did not become gluttonous until, mashallah, the Muslim Ramadan plan, right? 4/3 food, the esophagus water and no space for hair, right? No, they would, eat, but within balance and moderation. Right? And so, to me, this experience sharpened or I should say, brought the meaning of these verses close to me in a manner that I hadn't considered before, right? Seeing how some people cast religiosity differently. Now, inshallah, I'm going to ask you to break into small groups and look at the end of the hadith. The end of the hadith is an indication of a man who is described with several descriptions, but then the Prophet ﷺ ends the hadith, so how can his supplication be answered? Meaning that clearly there are blockers, or there are things that are impeding the likelihood of his dua being accepted. So this is a quick activity in small groups. I want you, one person to volunteer to list it out. I want you to list the indicators that promote the likelihood of acceptance. So for example, you know there's a hadith that indicates that there is an hour on Friday where the dua is accepted. Is that indication here? Is there any indication that that's one of the things here? There isn't, not in this hadith, right? But we know that's one of the adab of accepted dua. So find everyone you can in this and list them out, 1, 2, 3. And then outline what is the impediment that could be overcoming all that and making his dua potentially not accepted. You understand what's going on? It's only going to take about 3 to 4 minutes. List them 1, 2, 3, helping the dua and hurting the potential of acceptance of dua. Okay, so small groups.
So I think the first sort of four things listed there, that he's journeying, still wasn't the traveler always accepted. He's humble in his appearance with the disheveled and dusty clothes. And then he's putting up his hands in the sky to make dua. Those are all like things that promote acceptance. But then his food being haram, drinks, clothing, and how he's like come by those things. Oh, he makes it all haram. So that degrades acceptance.
So God did not accept his dua.
Right. So the first three about traveling, being humble in the appearance, and putting your hands towards all promote the dua being accepted.
Is he traveling for religious purpose?
It doesn't say.
Yeah.
Got a question that needs to be asked on top.
I don't know. I was confused about that too. Traveling to
Well, travelers usually dua is accepted.
Exactly.
You know,
But
it has to be accepted more than someone. It's the level of acceptance versus the person who's like, at home, sitting at home, versus the person who's on his way to travel, he makes dua. His dua is more accepted, right? Now, but for dua to be accepted, the right person who's saying it must be doing also legitimate things that God permits, either eating the right things that God permits, or dressing, and prohibit himself from prohibited things. Now, the other thing is, for this person, I think that's what the Sheikh is saying. What could be something he could have done to accept his dua? Maybe if he has asked for his God to repentance, and asking God that I know I am doing this, accept me, like to accept his wrongdoing to God and asking for his repentance. That is probably something that God could have accepted his dua. So if he admitted his acceptance, I mean, if he admitted his ignorance to what he's eating, what he's wearing, whatever, it's all haram, and saying, I am doing this, God, but I want you to accept my dua, and I'm going to repent.
But that's not the question. It's about what raises his quality of his dua being accepted. It's not about if he repenting or not. It's about
his dua,
those things there.
the thing is about the travel is the one that gives his dua more.
And what else gives his dua more?
I think if he actually journeys specifically to seek repentance.
Okay, inshallah, we'll come back together.
We don't know the context, right? mean, you take once you have to take proper boundaries, and with the intention of learning, to me that changes the person. Maybe I'm wrong.
You're probably right, Uncle.
Okay, so what are some of the conditions of acceptance of dua that are specifically evidenced or inferred in the text of this hadith? One at a time. One.
That he's traveling.
Okay, so the dua of the traveler is one of the accepted dua, and there's clear indication that this man is traveling. So that's one. What are other conditions to help? Remember, this is not a condition of acceptance of dua. You can have your dua accepted while you're home. But this is one of the things that helps dua be accepted, right?
That it was disheveled kind of shows the status of maybe or a couple.
Okay. So, ash'ath means like disheveled, right? So imagine like when we're, on Hajj or Umrah or on a long journey that, that state and you feel different than when you're in the comfort of home. What's al-ghubar mean? Remember, like in Arabic, ghubar, like dust, right? And so it means that they've, just the travel has caused, dust to settle on him. And so these are indication, and this is all indications of simplicity and humility. This does not mean that one should seek to have tattered clothes if you have the capability not to, right? Because in the beginning, in other hadith also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, beauty, loves to see the effect of His ni'mah on people. And so if a person is going through hard times, and, many of the Sahaba had one pair of clothes, right? And so this is one, but if you have the ability to have, good clothes, multiple pairs, within, reason and appropriateness and not excessiveness, this by itself is not a reason. But the simplicity and humility that is indicated by this man's appearance is. So when making dua, we should strive to be coming
humble
with our humility and Allah Azza wa Jalla's greatness, with our poverty and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ownership of all things and richness and ghina and self-sufficiency, with our weakness and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's absolute power, right? And absolute dominance and His ownership of the dominion, all things, and al-mulk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran al-Kareem, Ya ayyuhan nas, antum al-fuqara'u ila Allah, wallahu huwa al-ghaniyyu al-hamid. O humanity, you are the ones in desperate and persistent need of Allah, and Allah alone is self-sufficient, worthy of all praise. A person can be dressed in the most, mashallah, elegant dress or nice formal wear or whatever, and enter with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the heart of a person that looks like that. That's the indication here, right? The simplicity and the humility of the approach. Okay? Obviously in dunya still, Allah puts us through, like Hajj is a period where we are literally disheveled and overcome with dust and discomfort and not in our normal clothes and. So that by itself has benefit in the places that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Ramadan, it's hot, hungry, but it is not praiseworthy to seek this beyond the places that Allah put it in. Okay? But to make sure that the dunya that we acquire is in our hands, not in our hearts. Okay? So we said traveling, we said the clothes and the appearance as indication of simplicity and humility. And in general, by the way, we shouldn't dress in an arrogant or a showy way. Right? There's a difference between dressed nicely and being dressed to like show off or arrogant or feel you're better than people. What else?
We tend the disheveled and dusty to also possibly be that he was in distress.
Okay. Excellent. So another angle on it, that this distress, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمَّا يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَى. That Allah is the one that answers the one in desperate need when He calls upon Him, right? And so we can feel that deep need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at any time. But certainly when a person's under distress, it brings that need more to the forefront in the way that, say, sometimes we make dua a little bit more sincerely in our sickness than when we're feeling well, right? A mark of piety is to feel this need consistently. But as human beings, sometimes this becomes more apparent when we are in difficult times than when we are with ease. Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ indicates that know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your times of ease, He will know you in your times of difficulty, right? And so, this distress we need. What else?
See the fact that he spreads out his hand.
So he brings his hands and raises them to the heaven. This is from the etiquette of the dua. It's not required, but it is from the things that it brings it closer to acceptance. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which indicates that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hayy, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, roughly translated, is shy to allow a person to extend their hands to the heavens and then to return them empty-handed or at loss, right? And this is from the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sometimes would be so focused in dua that as he would raise his hands in dua, that the whiteness under his arm would become evident to people. And this is just from that physical, reflection of the connection of the heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's another point. That this consistency and persistence in the dua is indicated in the statement, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi. And I think this is a big challenge for us. We should not expect a dua to be answered immediately. And in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has His wisdom for delaying the acceptance of a dua or allowing a dua to repeat more and more so He can accept in a greater and greater way. And so we should be patient. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ indicates that a person's dua will be accepted as long as they do not rush, right? As long as they don't rush or yasta'jil, right? And so dua should be done with patience, consistency, and full knowledge and certainty that Allah will accept. So, in front of this...
The other things could be also what could be an indication of acceptance, the remoteness of the environment in which the dua is made, which is the khala, that could be another indication, because to make a dua in an area where it's a remote area and you are like trying to, seek forgiveness from God or something, is probably more accepted than if you are doing it in front of people.
Beautiful reflection. So this person's distance from other people helps with an ikhlas and sincerity. Is from the most essential agreements, and really the key to acceptance of the dua is sincerity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so his distance helps with that ikhlas, that he's alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, what is the circumstance that in front of these may cause this dua to be not accepted?
All his earning is impure.
His earnings are impure. Is that a summary pretty much of every, right? What the Prophet say, right? That his food, right, what he's eating is impure, haram, right? That what he's drinking is impure. That what he's dressed with is impure. And he's been nourished, right? And overcome with the haram or impure. So the Prophet says, so how can this dua be answered? This part of the hadith indicates the incredible importance of halal income and halal provision and tayyib, halal and tayyib. How does income become halal?
But non-sources aren't bad.
Right? By doing halal work. You have a question?
Oh, yeah. So I'm just curious, I kind of have a question. When it says like his drink is haram, is it like what he's drinking is haram? Because he didn't say like his kiss was haram or like the way he's earning his income was haram. I'm curious, is it what he's drinking is haram or is it the way he
Yes, it does. And both can be indicated by the hadith. Because a person whose income is haram, then what they are acquiring with that income is tainted with that haramness, right? Or a person can have halal income, but get things that are impure into their lives. And so both can be indicated by the hadith, and both should be avoided, and one should be cautious of it, right? A lot of lessons and so on stress the importance of halal income because it's so pervasive, right? Once there's haram income, then everything is tainted with it because you're buying it and moving it and transporting yourself. And it's not just you, right? And this is really one of the very important things for the parents in the room, for the to-be parents in the room. The haram income is from the things that directly harms your loved ones, right? Its harm does not stop at the person themselves. There's so many hadith that indicate the harm upon. It's not just inferred. There are literal expressions of hadith that talk about the harm upon one's children and family, right? But in addition, a person should be cautious about the purity and halalness of that which is consumed. There's the obvious stuff like, avoiding alcohol, avoiding pork, but also there is less obvious things like being cautious about, in our times, there are a lot of food sources that are just, behind unethical, industries, that treatment of animals in mass production in the United States and beyond, or oppressive economic practices in sourcing foods, right? I'm not going to equate that with something that's clear, like, alcohol or so on, but it is part of the concern of the believer, right? Especially if we have indication or we have an opportunity to do something that's more responsibly sourced, or that's not, upon this system that preys upon an animal or preys upon the international suppliers. We should absolutely be concerned with that because it's part of it being halal and tayyib.
About the clothing, it's mentioned even the clothing is haram. So how is that indicated?
So the clothing here is directly indicated by being purchased by haram sources, and can also be indirectly indicated, for example, and I'm talking about certain knowledge, not just that, but for example, if a person certainly could acquire much cheaper clothing through a sweatshop type setup, right, versus paying more for responsibly sourced. The challenge in our times is that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the people that preyed on the weak in this manner, it was right in their faces, right? Like an As ibn Wa'il, when a man comes from Yemen and he gives him his merchandise and he comes to demand his price, he's like, nah, I ain't paying you. You know what I mean? Why? Because I'm a chieftain and I'm the boss, right? So in their times, this haramness was more in your face, if you will, right? I recognize and acknowledge the difficulty that can come in our times, in that it can be so removed down the supply chain that we don't know. But in general, certainly a believer should be concerned about these things and make whatever reasonable effort is within their capacity to ensure that things are responsibly sourced, right? And the decisions we make, I think you can really see this in our times with technology companies, right? That the big technology companies, and all you see in the news about these inappropriate and kind of predatory practices, well, the places you put your dollars make a difference, right? And so a person that is certainly trying to apply this hadith in every sphere of their life and to the maximum extent possible could certainly seek to apply it in those types of purchase decisions as well, right? At the end of the day, in our times, it is nearly impossible in some regards to be 100% certain or be 100% pure of all impacts of interest and all impacts of, and this is something we have to ask Allah's forgiveness and mercy for, right? There are clauses in our credit card statements that are absolutely 150% haram, and yet, the ulama allow carrying credit cards because of the necessity. But we shouldn't forget that the basis is not to have those incorrect clauses, right? We should still come to Allah with humility. But that doesn't mean, doesn't matter. let me go ahead and, sell pork and sell this and sell that. No, control what you have control over. And for many people here, the number one pitfall for Muslims is in their choice of employment, particularly coming out of school. When we don't see, and I tell you honestly, I didn't figure this out because I was smart, I figured this out because I wish somebody spent more time with us when we were in school, hammering this into our heads over and over and over again. Because when you have that opportunity, particularly out of school, and you have that degree, employers see you as so flexible, and you have entrepreneurship ability, and, right? And so you have that opportunity to be very diligent and very persistent in asking reputable scholars for guidance on your source of income. And in particular, you can even do it not just asking your local imam or something, but you have the opportunity to ask your imam to help or shepherd a process where you go back to a council's opinion. That's what we do in IAR. I don't give people unemployment my individual opinion or Imam Muhammad's individual opinion. Whenever we can, we direct them to a fiqh council's opinion because these are emerging issues and we prefer to orient towards full-time researchers that are more senior in scholarship, whenever possible. Once you take that first job, it's still halal or haram, whether you're aware or not, whether you're looking or not, whether a person cares or not. It is halal income or haram income. But it becomes so much harder for you to move. And you still have to move. You understand what I'm saying? Right? Person that has haram has to take steps to move. Certainly, these steps do not have to be rash. A person that suddenly realizes that their livelihood is haram can hold on to that as they make steps to move, right? Not to leave their family starving, but it's still haram. And they still need to make those efforts wherever possible. It is, I'm telling you practically, it is so much easier to make this decision at 22 than at 32, right? It's so much easier to make that decision with your first job than your second or third or fourth move, when it's much, much harder and people have defined you in an industry. And so keep this prominently in your mind when you make these decisions. I cannot impress this on you enough, the importance of these decisions and the importance, honestly, of seeking scholarship. There are things that people think are halal that are 100% in the clear, and there are people who think that is no big deal, that is 100% haram income. And so this is an area where we should seek reputable scholarship, and wherever possible, so it's not just an emotional decision, if you can find a council opinion, seek the council opinion. If not, seek a reputable scholar or two to, inshallah, follow their opinion. But be very cautious with these decisions, inshallah, would be part of our advice, humble advice, inshallah, for implementing this hadith in our times. Another part, obviously, for our parents, our elders, ourselves, first and foremost, is that most people today, most Muslims and most people in general, earn their income as employees, right? And so you're being compensated for doing some specific job duties. So if you're in a halal source of employment, how does that income potentially become haram in that arrangement?
Because if you perform in haram,
Now, Jazakumullah khairan. So this is very important that that's at the end a contractual relationship based on the fulfillment of some duties. When a person is coming up short in that, an easy and obvious example is it's a 40-hour job and you put in 35, or what we call padding the timesheets or messing around with time clock. All of these things make that portion of income haram. You see what I'm saying? And now that taint is going to be all over the place. Interest-bearing transactions, another very common source of that haram taint. And excessive, like laziness or just, whatever, not, such abuse of the contract that, it cannot be considered to be fulfilling those job responsibilities. So be very, very cautious of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and our homes, inshallah, from trouble.
I just want to clarify, so like when you said like if they only work like 35 out of 40 hours, so does that mean like that 5 hours that they actually didn't work is haram, or does that mean like the
that portion of income has become haram. So like that paycheck, 5 out of 40, or whatever fraction that is, right, has become haram of that income. And in fact, if they have knowledge of that, they can't use that money. And they can't give it in sadaqah. You literally have to take that money, give it to a charitable cause with the niyyah of purifying impure money.
But the rest of the 30.
The rest of the money is halal.
Now the hadith ends with a question mark, at least in English. I'm not sure what the equivalent is. Was the question answered in the hadith?
Which question? The Prophet ﷺ says, فَأَنَّ يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. This is an indication of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the Prophet ﷺ did not explicitly say that his dua is rejected, right? But he's saying this happened, this, so where could this answer come from? Meaning that this is a very significant impediment to the acceptance of the dua. It may very well cause the dua to be rejected. The wording in Arabic indicates that Allah from His mercy could still accept the dua from this type of person. Okay, but certainly the believer would never put themselves in this circumstance and hedge their bets. But this is an acknowledgement of the rahmah of Allah. The Prophet ﷺ did not explicitly state that the dua would not be responded to. It's an indication that this makes it very far from accepted.
In a sense, he's making it, he's turning it into a question to his followers,
Right.
to say, how can God accept dua? How can Allah accept his dua, you know? But the end result is left with Allah to make the decision whether if you accept it or not.
No, exactly. Other questions, inshallah, on this hadith in general? Or comments? Yes.
You know, when in fundraising, or we see like some people's money is totally not allowed sources, but they are giving charity. And giving charity in like, let's say, for massages or for really, so what about that? How you can accept that money? And
So, to summarize a broader fiqh point and just kind of like some of the general rules, the niyyah of the giver has to be different for sadaqah money than for purification, right, or disavowing of haram money. But the recipient can be the same in many regards, right? So for example, I'll give you a very practical example. You go to the bank, you have a checking account, right? And let's say you try to avoid interest accounts, but you know the only option there is it gives you 0.005% interest, right? If you can avoid it, it's better. But if it comes, then at the end of the year, you have, I'm just making up numbers, $1,000, and you have $2 of interest income. This is now haram money that you have to disavow. You take those $2, and as the giver, I have to give it not with the niyyah of sadaqah, with the niyyah of what? Purification, getting rid of haram money. Okay? But the recipient can often be the same. So it could be fuqara and masakin. It could be certain charitable causes. There's a difference among the scholars, but that recipient is still eligible to accept that money. But as the giver, that's different, okay? This goes for the vast majority of cases. A person cannot accept money that they know was stolen from the neighbor next door or was forced, et cetera, et cetera. But most of what you describe in the fundraiser, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not bring us to account for more than we have capability of. So the giver, the recipient, does not have to go find out if they don't have certain knowledge that this money was brought in a totally illegitimate or predatory way. But as a giver, I have to be very concerned with this.
Does it also indicate that the one who is asking should know that you are doing all this wrong and still expecting it? It's a precondition that you're asking while you yourself know that perhaps it will not be accepted. The dua.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying because it's preconditions and you are not fulfilling those preconditions and still asking.
Yeah.
You should know for yourself that it could be rejected.
No.
But I can take that up and say that Allah is a Rahman, and He accepts the dua. Despite your weaknesses and challenges and being involved in all the same, you turn to Allah. You know, He's the one that can happen, can say. Even though I'm a sinner and all this, turning to Allah itself might even be a beginning of Allah's favor on you to realize your weakness and turn you back to righteousness. So even though you are in this great sin and all that, and you're making moves to get out of it, you see as Allah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if the Prophet had said it's rejected categorically, then maybe a person wouldn't feel like they're worthy to do that. But alhamdulillah, Deen is always a balance, right? Alhamdulillah, sometimes despite our best efforts, we fall into mistakes, or there's questionable income, or even investments. It's like nearly impossible. Some of you have your first 401k or your first investment in the market. It's like nearly impossible to get 100% pure. So you do your best. Don't invest in, Pork Incorporated or Gambling Incorporated or whatever. But you do your best, and then you may say, well, still, I think a couple percent is questionable. Disavow that money. At least you're awake. You're working on it, and then you hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we should always balance. I'm being a little bit strict, and I want to impart the seriousness of the issue of this, but certainly we should never give up hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Last couple of questions, inshallah.
So it's related to the wholeness of the money, whether it's halal or haram, and the question is related to some of the investment funds.
Would you
Sharia compliant would go about accepting that interest revenues or interest revenues would be at a permissible or insignificant percent. And they rely on and scholars who were accepted that up to 5% by the allowance. But I don't know. So this is the issue. That's the question.
No, Jazakallah khairan. This is a fine or detailed point in terms of allowability of investments. The challenge is, let's say, Apple Computer, right? So basically, their transactions are permissible. They're buying and selling technology. But in modern companies, what they do is instead of just making profit, they've got a bunch of capital. They stick a bunch of that capital in an account and just get interest on it, right? Which is then a haram thing. But everybody does this, right? And so major fiqh scholars and the IOFI, which is like the international Islamic, one of the major financing organizations, have set this, and this kind of bar is a well-accepted bar among a huge swath of scholars, not an isolated one. And still many of the Sharia-compliant funds, such as Amana, still what they actually engage in a purification process for you, right? And so part of their Sharia compliance is not just that they select funds, they actually purify a percentage that is estimated to be some of this unavoidable exposure. So mashallah, some of you that are blessed with this anchor, we hosted several finance workshops here at the masjid over the last couple of years. I really encourage you to ask and educate because it is technical, it is detailed, but it is definitely something that you can learn how to operate with comfortably. I hear people all the time coming and saying, oh, 401k, should I just avoid it? Like, you can learn how to navigate it confidently, inshallah, so that you can benefit from this and avoid as much of the doubtful as possible. And this is one indication, alhamdulillah. There's actually now organizations that like green light and red light by companies. Definitely there needs to be a lot more maturity, but they will measure these criteria for you on the prospectus and just give you very quick indication whether they meet these boundaries or not. I'm sorry, one more time.
I said some Muslim companies that deal with properties and homes, they may not have the interest around interest, but yet they charge you like a service fee or percentage. So I mean, you're still paying a percentage. Are they just changing what they call it? I mean, you're still paying if you bought your home from bank and you switch it over to a wrong company, and they still say, well, you're paying 4 points, so amount, but they change the name. They don't call it interest, but you're still paying 4 points.
So let me give a very, very insightful and important question. Let me give a brief answer, and I'm happy to dive into details with you. And this answer, it's a little bit sensitive, but allow me, inshallah, to share it with you because I think it really helped bring the point to me. When we ask these questions, is such and such fee allowed? Is this just interest in another name and so on? We have to recognize that operating in this space is at the intersection of two highly technical, highly complex fields. That's modern finance and modern economics, right? Which some of you may have studied, some of you may, specialize in extremely complex and complicated. And on top of that, Islamic finance, which is its own specialization. The ulama that help advise a guidance residential, a UIF, a Devon Bank. There's 6 that operate in Amin Housing, there's 6 that operate in the US or Islamic banks abroad. They have to master these two spaces simultaneously. So as a righteous Muslimah or Muslim, as an imam, quite honestly, we have to have the humility to say, I do not have mastery of these two spaces. So I can try to navigate, but I'm not going to be able to know the difference, just as much as if I'm not a doctor, I'm not going to be able to argue with a doctor whether the right treatment for this is radiation or surgery or chemotherapy, right? I just know Google level. So what we encourage Muslims to do is to check if a company is guided by trustworthy, credible scholarship. And then ask questions to your comfort because you're going to have to live. But at the end, there is no harm in doing taqleed or following a reputable scholar or ask your local imam to guide you, to a reputable thing. And then we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I asked. I recognize that I don't know all the details, but I knew that these people didn't drop from the heavens, right? That there's trustworthy people, and I followed them because I didn't have the tool. And I say this about myself. Like, I definitely keep up with this field. I ask. I'm not going to pretend to be an Islamic finance scholar. I'm not, right? There's people, how am I supposed to do that with marriages and khutbah and this? There's people that do that full time, right? I respect their scholarship. I respect their expertise. I can try to help navigate with any of you that are making these decisions. But there's a difference between being a master of a space and being able to move in that space. So the point that I want to share with you is a little bit sensitive. Outside of the Islamic understanding, if a person comes to you and says what you guys do, nikah, katb kitab, marriage, this doesn't make any bit of a difference. You tell him, no, I mean, we live together, this life and the hereafter and raise kids. And he tells you, no. Look, I know these people, they cohabitate. They love each other to death. Half of the Muslim couples end up separated, right? They're raising kids and so on. And they do, men and women, what you guys do with each other. Is his argument rationally acceptable? It could be. Is it Islamically acceptable? It's a world of difference. Why? What's the difference? The contract is the difference. The contract is the difference. Allah legislated that this is zawaj, marriage, honorable, and this is zina, one of the worst sins. You understand? That means you show up, you're strangers, you're engaged, you can't touch each other, you can't be alone with each other. You show up, parents are there, you sign a contract, you make a commitment on the book of Allah, and then you're husband and wife. Yes, that's exactly what it means. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated zawaj versus zina. Why do we respect this? Because it's from Allah. So similarly, Allah says, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَى وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. This is that they said, commerce is like riba. There's no difference. And Allah has permitted commercial transactions and has forbidden riba. So the point, and this is much broader than our respected sister's question, but I think this is so important and really impacted me, that sometimes these contracts can look similar in certain respects. Some fees are absolutely prohibited. Some fees are 100% halal. Some percentages are allowable as a contract structure. Others are not allowable by default, allowable by regulation and necessity in the US because there's no perfect contract. The credit cards you carry in your pockets, and I carry right here, are forbidden in Islam. It's not a permissible contract, but it's allowed by necessity. Okay, so some are like that, and some are 100% haram. If you want to study that, just like if you want to become a doctor, you got a couple decades of deep study to become a master of this field, go for it. But if not, and I say this certainly broadly to anyone, just with due respect to your question, I think when we make these decisions, we come with that humility, that we are not masters of these fields, and we may have to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we did our best, and then we followed people that are trustworthy. Because which fee is allowed, which is not, which is this, which is that. I see many Muslims, I warned you, Hadith number 1, right? I'm Egyptian, I can make fun of Egyptians, right? It's niyyah, man, right? And my heart is pure. My heart is tayyib, and inma al-amalu bin niyyah, right? That's much more than Egyptians, I'm just messing around. But we said in the beginning, we have to have good niyyah and good implementation. So we have to understand the implementation to our best ability. Okay. We'll have last question, inshallah.
Related to the contractual agreement and the difference between bay'a and riba. In dealing with Islamic finance, I know for sure through being interviewed by the due diligence team that they comply with the Freddie Mac because their intention is to sell my loan to Freddie Mac.
Sure.
So when you enter into that contractual agreement, initially it's been kind of camouflaged by Islamic finance, but they explicitly tell you the end result is going to be you'll be ending with your loan being sold a lender who's known for their whatever they're doing. So knowing that, is there any obligation for us to do?
This issue is not a secret for responsible companies that disclose it. And there is Islamic discourse discussed about this issue, which at its heart is liquidity and could change one day, but it's a far way off, right? And so it's something that the ulama have discussed in depth. Some of what is in Islamic contracts, in the US is not halal by itself, it's allowed by necessity and framework. And that's why, coming back to the Zawaj analogy, any responsible Islamic finance house or any responsible imam is telling you, this contract is not 100. I'm telling you, these credit cards are not 100% halal, right? But we are seeking to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying we did our best. If you cannot get the whole goal, get as much as you can. That's why it's also not a rip-off, right? So some of the third-party scholarly bodies have rated some Islamic financial institutions as better than conventional banks. And some have rated some Islamic contracts as worse than the conventional banks. It's rare, but it happens. So this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It is not an insider job. This is scholarship. People that have claims have to bring evidence. So this issue in particular, and I can go in more detail offline, but at its root is liquidity. It's something that there are specific fatwa and widely accepted opinions on. And again, that which cannot be attained in its completion, we attain as much as possible in it. Without this construct, there is no institution in the United States that can maintain liquidity, period, right? And so that's not a sweep under the rug thing. It's a scholarly thing that engaging the reality, responsible organizations have whole write-ups on this that you can see before you sign on the dotted line. It's not some inside secret. But to understand it also, even this language may be outside of some of our training, right? And that's fine, right? That's why we get to a level we can, and then we follow trustworthy scholarship, okay? But there is, if you want to not have one haram condition on your thing, then keep all your cash under the mattress, and still part of that cash is tainted because your companies have this and that. It's a sad, I say this, it's a real sad reality of our times, right? And so the approach, I could give you 100 fatwa that say, this is haram, and whomever doesn't do that. I don't want to give you stuff that I can't do myself, right? We want to be practical. And the practical is that we seek to get as close to the ideal as possible, and we ask Allah's mercy, right? And that's where I keep coming back to this marriage analogy. It's not the same. If it's this much better, then I come and tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's this much better. If I research and I found out that they call themselves, not riba 533, and I found out, no, the scholars said they're worse than bank of whatever. And then I meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I say, I did my research, I asked credible scholars, I found out that these people don't stand up to scrutiny. And so I went with the best option I had, conventional way. But to make this an issue and to make that effort, I think is indicative of the taqwa which we're seeking. Great questions. I know it's a little bit technical, but this is life-changing stuff, right? And to me, especially, mashallah, the group that we're blessed with, I think this is such an important thing. Jazakumullah khairah. I know it's a little bit technical and a little bit dry, but inshallah important. SubhanAllah, look at that perfect timing, right? الحديث الحادي عشر عن أبي محمد الحسن بن علي بن أبي طالب سبط رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وريحانته رضي الله عنهما قال حفظت من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك رواه الترمذي والنسائي وقال الترمذي حديث حسن صحيح. Talk about a segue, mashallah, man. Should not have timed that better, right? There's all the answers to all the questions. This hadith is actually part of a longer hadith. Imam al-Nawawi brought part of the hadith. He recorded part of the hadith. In the hadith of the Tirmidhi, the complete text comes, دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك فإن الصدق طمأنينة وإن الكذب ريبة. Leave what makes you doubt for that which does not make you doubt, for verily truth is tranquility and falsehood is doubt. It's a very general principle laid out in this hadith, okay, which indicates that the heart can be an indicator for the believer. But this is only so when the heart is clean. And it is not true in kind of harding out technical matters or matters that are known by trade. Okay? Very generally, and you'll see this often in the fatwa of the scholars, that a person that avoids the doubtful saves themselves from a lot of angst and uncomfort and psychological worry, and saves themselves from falling into the haram. Remember, we talked about this in an early hadith where the Prophet ﷺ gave the analogy of what? Of the shepherd, remember? The shepherd around the sanctuary, that if they keep roaming, that they will fall into the forbidden land, right? So this hadith is related to and expounding on a part of this. When we have a heightened awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then when we come across a situation that doesn't feel right, that gives us discomfort, then a person can leave what is unclear for that which is not. This ability is directly tied to the purity of the heart, because also the person can, their nafs can inspire them to evil, or they can have waswas to shaitan. And so, this is in terms of a person's closeness to that innate, pure nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them for. Easy example. Not even from human beings. Anybody have a cat? Right? You have a bowl that you put out for the cat to eat, and the space that they're designated to eat from. How does it walk in? You know, all cats walk in like they're better than everybody, including, whoever is providing for them, and the tail is wagging, and they're like, mashallah, look at this ground that's blessed for me to be walking on it. And they eat like a king or a queen, right? Why? Because that food is meant for them to have. They know it's allowed. You take that same cat and it sees a morsel of food that is not mealtime or not meant to be, or it's, what does it do? Sneaks in, rushes, grabs, and pounces out. SubhanAllah, why? This is part of that innate nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala endowed. You see that even the cat knows what is allowed, what is not allowed. This is just allowed in terms of food from a human being. Now, who are the closest people to this, to having that pure, unaffected nature and sense? Children, right? Because did children do wrong things? Children, mashallah, I see some of you have not been around children lately. Children do a lot of wrong things, right? So why do they not get sins? It doesn't have that premeditated, I know it's wrong and I'm gonna, you see what I'm saying? And so very much children act like, you say, share. No! Right? That's not right. You should be sharing. But again, it's not premeditated, right? It's not intentional the way it is with an older person. And so you see that child almost interact. No, I'm not sharing. No, that fridge looks good. You know what I mean? So these things are coming again from that pure nature that Allah endowed a person with as they learn this. But adults are not like this, right? And so a person that is righteous and pious has that most correct sense and can avoid this. Very practical implementation of this is for people that are given positions of leadership. For example, if we know that we're in an MSA environment, right? And every year we see what's coming up, issue of gender interaction, right? And okay, does the Quran say that we can have the committee meeting at 10 o'clock at night or not, right? Or, what's the minimum number of people that are CC'd on an email for it not to be a virtual khutbah? At the end of the day, is the Quran and Hadith going to tell you explicitly this? It's not. It's going to give you general guidelines. So a conscious believer, and particularly a person of wara and conscience, and a person that is given a responsibility or leadership, avoids the positions that could cause a person to blame them, avoids the positions of doubt, errs on the side of caution, okay? And wallahi, brothers and sisters, I acknowledge that we do not do a good job of sharing these best practices with one another. We need to do this as Muslim institutions, as organizations, right? But in general, meeting in public places, meeting during the daytime, meeting always in a larger group. All of these things make a person avoid that which is doubtful, right? And a person's choices of dress, not trying to tread the line, oh, there's haram and I'm like right here. No, how do you know? You could be falling into haram. And so make more conservative, more cautious choices, right? And I think very practical level, which this affects a lot of Muslims, is in the issue of gender interaction and in the issue of finances are some practical ways that this affects a lot of people, right? So having good governance and good practices helps a person still has to have taqwa, but then the habit and the environment is promoting the best behavior. Instead of putting yourself in the most difficult situations and seeing, can I have taqwa or not? These positive situations, this positive environment helps a person, inshallah, avoid the doubtful and protect their deen and their honor and themselves from criticism. Many ulama indicate that this approach is recommended, not obligatory. Okay? But still, in this group, we want to hold ourselves to a higher standard because of this responsibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given each of you. And so in general, what some ulama are saying may be true from a strict fiqh point of view, but from a point of adab and encouragement, certainly the Prophet ﷺ encourages us to do this. We should implement it. We should seek to avoid the doubtful and to put ourselves in positions where a person's heart is at rest and tranquil. Brothers and sisters, honestly, it's really difficult for me to talk about this hadith, I'll tell you honestly, because our environment is so far from this, and I don't, wish to be brought forth before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a hypocrite on the Day of Judgment, right? So much of our environment does not promote this, unfortunately, right? So much of what's trending and what's popular and what's in pop culture is the exact opposite of what we're describing in the previous hadith and in this hadith. In that sense, one of the most powerful ways to learn this hadith is to be around examples of it and eventually to seek to model it for others. Okay? So you have so many stories. I shared with you in the very beginning, Imam al-Nawawi had a particular fiqhi point of view about the allowability of awqaf that had been forgotten or abandoned. But he himself held himself to a higher standard. He would not eat from all the luscious fruits of Damascus, just out of wara and concern that some of it may have been a waqf point of view. Although he thought this is permissible, not haram. That was a higher standard that he held himself to. There's a story of a scholar who abandoned 50,000 silver pieces, okay? 50,000 darahim of inheritance. You know what that is in our times? That's six-figure inheritance. That's like hundreds of thousands in inheritance, okay? So say about $250,000 in inheritance. He did not take a penny of it because he was concerned that his father used to work for rulers that may have been corrupt. Okay. $500,000 of inheritance avoided because his father used to work for Muslim rulers that may have been corrupt. Okay? So many of these examples they put it's like, wow, man, what a gap. You know what I mean? And we're busy what celebrity is divorcing what other celebrity, right? And all this nonsense and all this juvenile behavior. You know, honestly, I'm sorry, you see pop culture and songs and this and that, and it's are these relationships or is this a meat market? Men and women, what is this, right? The open, and sadly a lot of Muslims are getting into this. A lot of Muslims really approaching relationships, I'm sorry, for pure physical desire. No thought about the rest of the relationship and the responsibility that comes with it. Wallahi, I've had imams that conduct nikah, and then, you have the paper and you gotta send it back, and you get a call from the person before they've gotten home. They got into a fight, Imam, don't send it in the mail, we want to get talaq. What is this, right? What is this, right? And so, all of these things, in our sphere of money, in our sphere of marriage, in our sphere of relationships, in our sphere of leadership, sadly we lack these examples, which is why I really, really stress for MSA leaders, for youth group leaders, for, mashallah, some of the leaders and participants in some of the relief organizations and so on, surround yourself with a due measure of your elders. Be rooted in a community. Don't go from service event to service event on a weekend. Don't only have people in their teens and 20s and 30s in your life. You have to find people that demonstrate this. And these demonstrations tend to be more prevalent on people that are older and more wise, right? Because this hadith is really learned by an example. In fact, one of the scholars indicates that from the signs of a disease of a society is that they lose the barometer to be able to tell what's right and what's wrong. So that means that our society is seriously diseased, right? When you see a perfume or a cologne is marketed by taking a person stripped of almost all clothes on a television screen, and people don't feel like, oh, this is normal, happens 10 times in the Super Bowl. Well, guess what? There's 10 times of a problem in our brains and our hearts. We have shifted off of what's right and wrong. When the norm is that a person is in 10 relationships before they settle into one that is married, right? when the norm is it's unheard of for a person to make it through college, may Allah protect us, with their chastity. All of these things are an indication of how far we're straying. None of that stuff is doubtful. That's as clear cut haram as it gets. And yet we're falling into it over and over and over again. So it's important, inshallah, to remember this standard, and this is really part of why in this gathering, I'm not trying to define the bottom for you and me, right? If you're in this room, more is expected of you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you this drive, He gave you this education, He gave you this thirst, He gave you this ability. Therefore, you don't think only for yourself. Think for your family, think for people that you do, hold yourself to that higher standard. And inshallah, this is something that we have to particularly promote among our young professionals and college students, where now people are very empowered to be independent of everything around them. And sometimes these behaviors that are far from our deen can become normal even in our practicing Muslim circle. And so coming back to that heightened awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being surrounded with good company helps us, inshallah, elevate ourselves to that level. The final comment I'll make is that the ulama are intent to mention that this does not always mean that choosing the most difficult opinion is the most praiseworthy. Okay? So in some things, when you are fatwa shopping in the sense that you are looking for the easiest, most isolated opinion on every fiqhi matter, then there really is a problem. But if for you, fatwa shopping means that when I find difficulty in something, I ask for a second opinion, I check if there's room among the ulama, I check this and that, then inshallah, it's more allowable, there's no problem. Okay? So it doesn't mean that always seeking this excessive hardship, but it means to find, inshallah, that balance in that when you feel an opinion is weakly evidenced, or you're always taking the easiest thing is different from what's most facilitating, inshallah. And in some regards, alhamdulillah, the difference among the scholars is a mercy in this regard. And so balance between that, avoiding fringe or doubtful matters, hold yourself to a higher standard, but there's also no harm in taking an opinion that's facilitating for you when it's supported by strong scholarship. So subhanAllah, this brings us to the end of our time. Inshallah, we came to Hadith number 11. Make sure you're on the list. If not, please see Brother Kashif, because we'll announce the first weekend that we'll be starting in January, inshallah. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to preserve you and keep us all steadfast upon this deen, inshallah. Remember one another in your prayers. And I'll stay up here if there's any questions, inshallah. Subhanahu wa ta'ala.